A security guard working for a local TV station. He was jailed over the weekend in connection with the deadly shooting of another man during right and left-wing protests dueling in downtown Denver over the weekend. So the security guard, Matthew Doloff, he's suspected of fatally shooting that man following an altercation during these opposing protests. So Chief Video Director at the Daily Caller, Richie McGinniss, he's here to weigh in on this conflict. It's good to see you again, Richie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Richie, I mean, the reason I wanted to have you on here is you've actually been involved in many of these protests, both as somebody behind the camera and somebody who is filming what was going on in both the left and the right wing environment. So break down what you know for us about this case. As I understand it, the shooter was hired as a security guard by a local news organization. Now, he's not a licensed security guard. Social media posts seem to appear that he has some affiliations with left-wing groups like Antifa. Is that correct? And then what are the circumstances that led to the shooting? Was he instigated? It seems like there was pepper spray involved. Just lay it out for us.
As for your question regarding whether or not he's affiliated with Antifa, I think we're still going to have to wait a little while for that to really shake out. We saw similar things after other shootings where people want to find out what somebody's ideology is and exactly what the motivations were. Unfortunately, with an organization like Antifa, it's intentionally centralized. It intentionally doesn't have real leadership structure. And so it's difficult unless he literally comes out on his social media and says, you know, I'm a member of Antifa. Then right. It's hard to determine whether or not he actually was a practicing member of that group. Now, as for why he was there the other day on I believe it's Saturday or Sunday, we've gone to a multitude of protests around the country, and we've seen any news correspondents that are out there with big cameras. They're going to draw a lot of attention from protesters. And so basically any of those larger networks that are operating with that kind of equipment, they're going to have private security. So when we were in the Chaz, for example, we talked to the Fox News security team, and just speaking with those guys, obviously they are security guards, but they also have private lives. They also have private political positions. Right. The particular individuals that we talked to in the Chaz, they seem to be more right-leaning, but in this case, it does seem that he was more left-leaning. And now at these kind of protests where you have two different groups, two different sides, the communists and then the patriots, or whatever combination of groups it is, if they actually come into contact with each other, we've seen this absolutely descend into chaos, multiple different instances around the country in the past couple of months, and this is just the latest and obviously a deadly instance of that taking place.
Right. And so this is what I want to make clear. I'm glad that you made that, which is, first of all, you can never really know what somebody believes, right? I mean, I just saw that one of these Michigan people who was arrested for trying to kidnap Governor Whitmer also attended a Black Lives Matter protest because he hated central authority. So trying to pin these things down is very difficult. So whenever it comes to this, he seems to have not a rightful reason to be there. He was there and he was involved in this particular case. What was happening on the so-called right-wing side? I mean, obviously an altercation took place. Do we know anything about that altercation and about why this happened and ultimately why he discharged his weapon and ended up killing this person?
So the man who was killed, Lee Keltner, allegedly was killed, and you can see that he actually has bear mace, and that's actually characteristic. A lot of these protests, you see the right-wing side usually they're more well-equipped, just generally speaking, in terms of having non-lethal like bear mace, tasers, paintball guns, and things of that sort. We saw that in Portland in August. Actually, one individual is being charged for shooting a paintball gun in Portland. So he does have some bear mace. But what you can also see in the photos that were taken by a photojournalist who was on the scene is that at the time that the bear mace was discharged, the gun, Doloff has already drawn his gun. And the distance between the two of them at the time that the bear mace is discharged is at least 5-10 feet. And at that distance, there's no real lethal threat. I mean, we've been bear maced across the country in multiple cities. And I can attest to the fact that it's not very comfortable, but it's very clear from the photos that what he's holding in his hand is not a firearm, but is in fact a can of bear mace. So I think there could be a lot of questions regarding specifically why that pistol was discharged and specifically what threat he felt in front of him.
Right. I think that's the very clear thing about this, which is that, whenever it comes down to self-defense, stand your ground law, and so much more, I don't actually know what the local laws are in Colorado. So some of what I've seen here, Richie, shows that there was some sort of physical altercation, which appears to have preceded the use of the bear mace. What do we know about this? Based upon those photos, there was a time where, I'm not saying they came into blows, but there was something that happened here. What was that?
It was something like a smack. It's hard to tell in the photos because obviously there's still images. But you can see he brings his hand up, Keltner, who eventually got shot, brings his hand up and kind of swaps at Dolph's hat. And it's not clear how hard he hit him, but it was hard enough to knock the hat off of his head. Now, after that, you can see that there's actually a brief period in between when he gets slapped and when he pulls his firearm out. And so they're actually standing a good distance apart. And then I'm not familiar with the Denver laws. I'm not familiar with Colorado state law, and I'm not a lawyer either. But it's clear that there's quite a distance between the two of them at the time that the gun is drawn. And as for whether or not that slap something that deemed life-threatening, or I'm not really sure. You'd have to ask eyewitnesses on the scene how hard that slap actually was,
right?
And if anything preceded that as well, because that's the only context that we have thus far.
Yeah, I think that's the eternal question here about whether this is a self-defense incident. I should mention, too, that the security guard, as far as I know, hasn't pleaded anything, hasn't even been charged, or he's been charged with first-degree murder, but there has not been a plea, and there's a long way to go, as there are in all these cases. So, Richie, thank you for joining us, breaking this all down as somebody who's had a lot of experience in the field yourself. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Dogger.
Next on Rising, Kanye West, he released his first campaign ad. Surprisingly, not that bad. We're going to take a look when Rising returns.